Hello, everybody, and we are live. Welcome to today's episode of Amazon's FireSide Chat. As usual, it's me, Anisha. I'm here from the Amazon Evangelist team for apps and games, and I'm joined as usual by Mario. Hey, Mario.
Hey Anisha, hey guys, I'm super excited to be back here. Sorry you lost me for a week. I left Anisha alone, but yeah, I'm back. Anisha, thank you for having me. Yeah, great to be here as usual.
Nice. So we've got a really cool topic for you today, and it's so good that we're actually going to be breaking it down into two shows. So today's show, without further ado, I'll introduce the topic, is going to be submitting apps to the Amazon Appstore. Part one. So today we're going to be focusing on pre-submission and prerequisites to submitting your app. And in 2 weeks from now, we will be talking about, what you have to do after your app is submitted and best practices for when you actually have to submit your app and testing it. So lots to cover. So we thought we'd break it into two parts. But as usual, we have a few housekeeping rules for today's session. So first thing, don't forget to engage in the chat. You may notice or you may not have noticed that we're actually streaming to LinkedIn today as well. So if
First
you are
time.
joining us from LinkedIn, big hello. Thank you for joining. Um, engage in the chat, drop in on Twitch if you have questions, on YouTube, pop them in the chat, and we will do our best to answer. We will be here every Tuesday at 6 o'clock GMT, 10 a.m. PST. When you're in the chat, just be respectful. Just use respectful languages. We want to make sure that everyone has a good time, and we create a great environment for everybody. And last but not least, don't forget to follow, subscribe, like, all the shebang. Our handles are up there. Oh, there we go. So follow us, set reminders. We are here every Tuesday, 6 o'clock. So yeah. Mario, anything to add before we jump right in?
No, we have a lot to talk about. There is a lot going on with the submission. A lot of things that you should know. Yeah, I would say that we should probably kick off and talk about. I think the first thing is we're talking about the prerequisites, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, a little bit of introduction. So why are we talking about app submission? I mean, I think like many of you might have questions, but like our goal is to make app submission for Android apps simple and easy, and that's the very short, simple answer, short, simple, easy answer as to why we're doing this. So most of the time, your Android app will just work off the bat on Amazon Fire devices without modifications, but there are a few things that you need to keep in mind before you submit to the Amazon App Store.
Mhm.
So I have very few slides today, but I will show you the first one, which is submission prerequisites. So some of these might seem obvious, but they are things that you have to do to ensure that your app will be able to be submitted to the Amazon App Store. And the first thing is you need to make sure you have a Amazon customer account. So this might seem counterintuitive if you already have a developer account, but you do need to have a customer account, and you can do this on Amazon.com. And then once you've got the customer account, creating a developer account should be super easy. You just again go onto the developer portal, sign in with the same email address as your customer account, and the portal will guide you through the rest of what you need to do to ensure that your dev account is all set up. So customer account on Amazon.com, developer account on the developer portal. Third, obviously you need to have an Android app. So you want to have an app that you want to publish to the Amazon App Store. And each app must comply with the Amazon content policy. So Amazon will determine that an app contains and promotes and facilitates content that is followed by our guidelines. And if it doesn't, then Amazon will have to reject the app submission. But don't worry, we will go into more detail about what those content guideline policies are very shortly. Fourth is the image assets that you'll need for product promotion, not production promotion. So screenshots of the large and small icons that you'll need to promote your app on the Amazon App Store. and any other promotional images and videos that you'll be using. And finally is intellectual property documentation if you need to. So if your app uses IP from a third party, you have to submit the documentation that you've obtained the proper licensing and permissions to use their IP within your app. So 5 things you probably might already know, but great to keep in mind when you're doing your app submission. Anything to add, Mario?
No, really, no. Super important. I think that again, we'll go over those in detail. But if there is one point that I want to highlight, is the last one, which is the intellectual property documentation, is very often forgotten by developers. It's something that even personally, when I was a young indie developer, I had problems with this. Sometimes you need to make sure that everything that you do is 100% compliant. When I had some of my apps when I inadvertently used some content that was covered by specific licensing and intellectual property, and you need to make sure that you comply, because that can be a serious violation, and it can get your applications removed very swiftly from the store. So again, we'll deep dive into a lot of these later, but yeah, that's something that is always very good to have in mind.
Awesome. So again, kind of more on the overview of how you would submit your app. So if you have ever submitted an app, you're probably familiar with this process, but it's good to just keep in mind. So, this is a high level overview, and in this session we'll be looking at, the first part, and the next session we will be looking at the submit part. So first things first, obviously you have to develop, or if you have an existing app, migrate your app to publish on the Appstore. Second is testing. So you need to make sure that your app meets the test criteria for the Amazon Appstore specifically, which we will cover soon. But there are many services that Amazon has that are available to test your app. We have covered a few of these before. So we've got things like the app tester, the in-app purchasing app tester, web app tester. But before you submit your app, you need to test for general compliance with Amazon Appstore requirements, and you can use the app testing service for this. So I will post the links to this in a bit, and we will go into more detail as well. But you can also live test your app. So you can use the live app tester, which we also covered in one of the previous sessions, where you can beta test your app with a small group of pre-selected users. So just to ensure that everything's working smoothly with live users. Once you've developed and tested, the next thing to do is obviously submit your app. And this is what we will be dedicating that 2-week Twitch session to. Finally, once you've done this and your app goes through the process, you need to respond to any failure notifications if you have any. So if your app fails any submission criteria, you will receive a notification that your app was rejected, and then you can take the steps to fix and resubmit your app. And finally, there is a whole submission process for updating your apps. If you need to make changes once your app has already gone live, there's a lot of documentation on how to do this, and we will be covering this again when we talk about submitting your app. So let's talk about what we're here for, which is the app submission prerequisites and general best practices to ensure that when you do submit your app, it is straight off the bat accepted to the Amazon Appstore. So I'll hand over to Mario, who has some great general tips for app submission.
Yes, thank you, Anisha. So everything starts from your account. I would say that is actually one of the most important things that you need to not only create, but you need to keep an eye on. So not everyone knows, but your Amazon developer account that you use on the Amazon App Store is actually tied to your Amazon customer account. So I mean, if you already have an Amazon account, you can just propagate that one to become your developer account. You just need to sign the developer agreement, and then automatically your Amazon customer account becomes your developer account. Or you can just register a new, let's say you want to separate your company account from your Amazon account. You want to maybe register a new developer account, a new Amazon account as a corporate, and register that one as your developer account. So keep in mind that any changes that you make to the sign-in credentials of your Amazon account is also propagated to your Amazon developer account because it's the same account. You should be used to this because it's pretty much the same for all the other app submission services that you tend to share the same account. But for Amazon, it's very specific because not everyone thinks about their Amazon retail account with their Prime account on it, that is also their developer account, but it is exactly how it is. The other thing to keep in mind is about email communication. So Amazon will only send the emails about your developer account to the address that is listed in the company profile when corresponding you about your app status. So it's important that all this information is number one, is kept up to date and is something that you actually have access to. So if you change the credentials on about your corporate account in your developer account, then you might lose important communication. So keep in mind, when you set up a new Amazon Apps and Games Developer Portal account, you are the default account administrator. You can add other people in other roles to the account. For example, you can add someone as a developer or as a marketer or as an analyst. You can also modify permissions and add other users and as administrators as well. And keep in mind that although any developer or administrator can submit an application, so only only those roles can, Amazon will not send messages to the email account associated with the person who submitted the app, but it will send the email only to the one that has been indicated as the official account holder email. So keep in mind that if you have a multifaceted team with multiple functions and more people submitting apps, those will not necessarily receive the communication. So keep an eye on your communication. If you need to change that piece of information, you need to go on the company profile in the settings tab of the developer portal and change that. So again, keep in mind, multiple accounts, but all related to the key company profile. So the next thing is about what we can call app preparation. So it's all the different information that is related to the individual submission of the app that needs to be kept up to date if you want to maintain a clean submission process. So let's say, for example, you have multiple versions of the app coming, you need to provide the correct information for every new submission in a way that it does overwrite the correct previous version. So there are three main things to keep an eye on when it comes to the app preparation. The first one is, and again, probably if you're an Android developer, you're very used to this already, is the version name. So the version name, it's something that you define again in the Android manifest of your application, is what is being displayed on the developer portal as the current version of the app. So that is just a string. It's not a number. It can be anything. You can literally write down as a string like version 0.1, for example, if you want. So it's a string. It must be just fewer than 50 characters. The second thing, which is actually probably even more important than the version name, is the version number. So the version number is an incremental number that you add in your manifest under the tag Android version code. And that is actually identifying what version of the app is the most recent one. So when customers are going to download the application, they will receive the latest version of the app based on the version number. So this is, make sure that this is an integer value whose value increases each time a new version of your app is released. The last thing that you want to keep an eye on is the device filtering. So there are a lot of information that you can filter out using the Android manifest. This is all done through the manifest itself. We've seen it in previous in previous sessions. We've seen, for example, that if you add specific tags to identify Fire TV, your applications will be identified only as an app for the big screen. So we will share links afterwards, but there is a specific set of conventions that you can follow to support device filtering and compatibility. That is very, very important to do. And then I would say last but not least is best practices for 64-bit APK submission. So most developers should probably now be targeting 64 bits anyway. But keep in mind that the Amazon Appstore accepts both hybrid 32-bit and 64-bit APK submissions, in particular for Fire tablets, 11th generation and above. So this means to reach all Amazon devices. And if you want to do that, you should develop, first of all, with 64-bit in mind. Like moving forward, 64-bit is going to be the standard. And you can separate the filtering. If you have a 32-bit version and a 64-bit version, you can use different folders to address that. But keep in mind that if you have one version in one folder and you're providing an alternative, you should provide the right version in the right 32 or 64 bit folder. If you have a 32-bit library in the 32-bit folder, for example, but don't have the same library in the 64-bit format in the 64-bit folder, this might lead to crashes. For example, if you have things like in a purchase, there may be some incompatibility. So make sure that you have the same library supported, both the 32-bit and 64-bit version. So this is it when it comes to, I would say, some initial best practices for some general tips for successful app submission. But now I think that we should now look into what we call the Amazon Appstore pre-submission checklist. There are actually quite a lot of content to cover there. So I will actually pass back over to Anisha for the submission checklist.
Yeah, thanks, Mario. So these are like 9 things we think you should check before you submit your app. So as we all know, the Amazon App Store allows you to publish your app to millions of registered Amazon customers. But before you submit your app, to make sure that your app meets all of the requirements and passes the review process, these are things we think you should double check. Make sure you've got incorporated and adhere to. So the first one on my list would be app content. So all apps submitted to the Amazon App Store must adhere to guidelines that are described in the section in the Understanding Content Policy within the documentation, whose link I'm going to post in the chat now. So if you have a look at the documentation, you'll see that there are a lot of different guidelines for understanding what content is allowed and what is prohibited, whether the app contains or facilitates or promotes content that is prohibited by these guidelines or not. And Amazon will reject apps or app submissions or suspend further distribution of your app if they don't meet these guidelines. So best thing to do is make sure before you submit that your app does adhere to all the guidelines. So there's guidelines around things like family friendly, offensive content, real, like whether you've got gambling associated with your app, intellectual property infringement. There's a whole range of things that you need to keep in mind and ensure before submitting your app, to ensure that it does get published and that no action is taken against your account if it doesn't meet these guidelines. So if there are violations, of the guidelines, these guidelines may result in the termination of the developer account. So this is definitely something you don't want to happen to your developer account or to your application. And it's one of the more, things that we keep in mind. That's why it's kind of top of the list.
Awesome.
Sorry, I passed over to Mario for the next one. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. No worries, Anisha. So app preparation, and actually quite a lot of stuff to discuss here. So the first thing is getting your application packaged in the right way. So preparing the APK file for your application. So there are a few steps to do that. For Android developers, if you're using Android Studio, this should be very straightforward. You should already be used to this. There are tools within Android Studio that very easily allow you to sign your application and to align it and package it correctly so it can be directly submitted to the Amazon App Store. However, if you're not using Android Studio, let's say if you are building a custom web application or a hybrid application, and the tooling system that you use don't offer in intrinsic or automated packaging system or aligning system, one important step that you have to keep in mind is to do the so-called zip aligning of your APK file. So this is a step that is required. There is tools that are within the Android SDK that allow you to do zip align very easily for an APK file. Keep in mind that if you submit an unaligned APK file, which technically itself an APK is just a very complex zip file, but if this APK is not zip aligned, the developer portal will automatically reject it. And it will say the submitted APK does not appear to be zip aligned. Please zip align your APK and resubmit. So make sure that your APK is zip aligned. In addition to zip aligning your APK, and again, I want to reinforce, if you're an Android developer, you mostly don't have to do this. However, if you are an Android developer and you are using the new Android X library for multidexing, you need to keep this Android X library for multidex unobfuscated. So if you're using something like ProGuide, for example, you will need to add a line that specifically unobfuscate the multidex class. Otherwise, the APK file that you submit might be rejected because it doesn't detect correctly the multidexing of your Android APK. So this is it for packaging your application. The next one is about signature and wrapping. So Amazon, when you submit your application, Amazon removes the signature that you use to sign your application, and it uses a new re-signing mechanism with a unique signature for your developer account. This signature does not change, and it is the same for all apps across your account. So there is a process for this. You can find the Amazon signature hashes for your account when you create an app in the developer console. The SHA-1, MD5, and SHA-256 hashes for your account are listed in the APK files tab in the Appstore certificate hashes section, and these hashes are for if you want to view hashes for a live app, you need to edit the app or create a new version. So if an app is submitted and it goes live, then this information is no longer visible to you. It will be visible when you submit the new version. So you know what's going on. And the next thing is about the wrapper. So when you submit an APK to the Amazon App Store, Amazon adds a wrapper to your code that includes metadata and an application signature, which is what we talked about before. Amazon wraps your APK for multiple purposes. It helps collect analytics related to the app, to evaluate and enforce our program policies, share aggregated information with you and others regarding the developer program. and allows you to modify and add to your app, so we can enforce digital rights management as well. So it's related to DRM. We talked about DRM before, but the wrapper it also helps in engaging with that. Even though more recently the setup of the DRM mechanism is now managed through a separate SDK, which is the Appstore SDK. If you're interested in that, Anisha made a very, very nice video on DRM. Finally, we do this in order to add the metadata to your application, so we can improve compatibility with all and upcoming Amazon devices as well. So keep in mind that this is happening. The signature that you have and the code wrapper that you and the wrapping that you do for your APK, once your application, after your application is submitted, it will change. So that is important in particular, because changing the signature, like for examtle the SHA-1 and SHA-2 256, are often used in combination with they're often used in combination with like APIs, for example, or SDKs to generate encryption keys. So know that is happening, and if it's actually a good idea always to live test your application before you go in production, because if you go into live app testing mode, the application will act as in production mode, so you can also test your app versus this specific new signature that your app has. The next thing that we need to talk about is about Apk size limitation. So APK files can be up to 2.5 gigabyte in size. Amazon recommends that you deploy small APK files that download and install quickly. And upon first launch, your application can then download whatever additional information is required. One call out is the binary blobs, which is the .obb format, are not supported by the Amazon App Store. So it is up to you to install external resources in the proper path after downloading them at runtime, and to submit an APK that is compiled without using OBB. Another important thing is that Amazon App Store no longer supports SFTP to upload APKs of size greater than 2.5 gigabytes. After Amazon publishing cycle, which is about every 30 to 90 minutes, depends on your application, depends on where it is in the pipeline. So 30 to 90 minutes is the publish cycle. You should receive an email that from Amazon that indicates that your APK was uploaded successfully. And when you return the APK files tab, you should see that your file is uploaded. The next thing that we need to talk about is screen resolution. So quite a lot of additional things to keep in mind. And this is related to what I was saying before about specific filters that you can select using Android Manifest that will determine which devices are capable of receiving a specific version of your APK. So when creating the APK for your app, you should consider multiple screen sizes and resolution. The primary ones are small screen, normal screen, large screen, or extra large. You can also look at density. If you're interested into more details about this, we did a very nice session about screen density, and there is dedicated videos on that as well that talk about tablet and screen density in particular. So in this case, you have different density sizes. You have like low density, which is 120 dpi's, medium density, which is 160 dpi's, high density, which is 240 dpi's, and extra high density, which is over 320 dpi's. So density also determines what APK. You can have different APKs for different densities and screen sizes. That's entirely up to you. A lot of developers opt to, of course, reduce the number of APKs and have maybe one app to rule them all, so you don't have to update different versions of your APK, which might become a little bit scattering and difficult to support. Instead, a good approach is to have scalable applications with with a responsive UI. It can gracefully scale across different configurations, and even if you have a split screen situation right now, we are also introducing desktop, where you will have potentially an application that gets resized multiple times. So dealing with density is super, super important. So we talked about that. Next thing that I want to talk about is images. Actually, that's something that is very important. You find more information about it in a documentation page that is our asset guidelines documentation. Anisha, if you can share the link, great. Thank you so much. So images and multimedia. There is a dedicated tab when you're submitting your application. That is the Images and Multimedia tab, that allows you to submit a collection of images that Amazon will use to represent your application in its Appstore listing and for promotional purposes. So there is a variety of assets that you can upload. Each image asset has some unique specifications and unique guidelines that are detailed in the documentation that we just shared. Additionally, of course, all images that you share must adhere to the Amazon App Store content policy. So, as you can imagine, there is actually content that you need to take in account, and the fact that, again, you need to make sure that you're respecting all the licenses and IP, and that you're also not providing like things like, for example, adult images or images that are forbidden by the content policy. So make sure that your applications are that your images are respectful of all the content. And as a good segue, I will pass over to Anisha to actually specifically talk about intellectual property. I think you're on mute, Anisha.
Sorry, I didn't want everyone to hear me typing away while I was putting the links in the chat. Cool. So intellectual property. So if your app uses intellectual property, as we said, you need to obtain the proper licensing permission to use the IP from the third parties. So you will have to provide documentation of your license rights to Amazon in order to list it on the App Store. And this is either a confirmation letter from the IP rights holder or a formal signature or a copy of the applicable license agreement. And Amazon will contact you during the process of your submission to provide this documentation in a way that associates it with your app. And just so you know, screenshots of license agreements are not considered valid documentation for this requirement. You have to provide it in the form of a PDF file. So if you've got a screenshot, just make sure it's a PDF file instead. Cool. So the next thing on our checklist is one of my favorite things to always do is testing. So as we said, we have many things that you can use for testing. But in this particular instance, I'm going to focus on the app testing service, which is what happens when your app is submitted and is tested for general compliance with the Amazon App Store requirements. So when you submit the app, it will automatically pass a series of tests to qualify for publication. And as you develop your app, you can use the test criteria on this page as a guide for your own quality assurance testing before you submit it. So to ensure that it does pass those tests, you can use these guidelines to ensure that it does. So the app testing service tests your app for common issues that can prevent it from being compatible with Amazon and other mobile devices. And it also provides access to test devices that enable you to see how an app looks and performs on a virtual device hosted in an Amazon device cloud environment. And most Android tablets pass the app testing service tests with no additional development required too. So at a high level, there's a few things that your app should have to do to pass the qualifications. So first is have a simple and well thought out user experience that doesn't cause user confusion. It should be thoroughly tested and free of bugs, crashes, and obvious defects. It should provide visual indication that a user's action has either succeeded or failed. And it should fail gracefully if the user tries to access unsupported functionality or if there's like an error. For example, for Fire TV, Fire Tablet, it should fully utilize the screen and be free of visual defects such as distorted images, pixelated images, or illegible text. And the UI text should be free of grammatical or spelling errors. So these are probably things you should be doing regardless, but it's things that the app testing service will check for too. So there's a couple of other things that Fire TV qualifications need, which is your app has to be designed to be displayed in 180p resolution for the best possible experience. It should have limited text entry requirements, and users should be able to read text and UI elements approximately 10 feet away. And the app should be 2 GB or less in size. And this size includes your first launch downloads of additional assets or other content. So we have spoken a lot about, designing apps for both Fire TV and Fire Tablet. So we've dedicated Twitch sessions we've got in the past and dedicated YouTube videos. So if you've watched them, your app should 100% meet these qualifications. And if you haven't watched them, I definitely think you should go back and watch them so that you don't run into any of these problems. So one thing for Fire tablets is that your app's UI should take into consideration and utilize the notification bar and the dynamic soft key behavior of the menu. There's a few things to keep in mind for your remote and voice. So make sure your UI is easily navigable with the up, down, left, right, and doesn't require motion events or rapid input for use. And it should be usable, or you should hope that your app is usable with one hand, and it doesn't require two hands for sustained interactivity, because, as you know, the D-pad remote that comes with the Amazon Fire TV comes with a small remote that's usually used with one hand. And if the user needs to hold the remote sideways to use your app, inform the user that they have to do so that the navigation is handled correctly. And avoid interactions that need simultaneous pressing of buttons, especially for core functionality. So a couple of things that the app testing service will check for, and you should keep in mind. So next on the list, we have device targeting. So Mario spoke about this quite a bit. And this is just, again, reiterating what he said, is make sure your device make sure you, in your Android manifest, you specify which devices your app plans to target. And when you submit your APK into the Amazon Appstore, the attributes in your build Gradle file will determine what devices your apps can be installed on, and incompatibilities with these files and device capabilities will prevent your APK file from being supported on that device. So ensure that you've got all that sorted before you submit it in the APK files tab within the Amazon App Store. And then I'll hand it back to Mario for installation location.
Yes, thank you, Anisha. Wonderful. So installation location, that is something that a lot of developers don't think about when they think about their application. So one thing that, again, the Android manifest does is to specify the installation location for your application, and then it does apply as well to Fire TV and Fire Tablet devices. So for most application, setting this value to external storage, which is you do that by setting prefer external, will provide a better experience to your app users, in particular on Fire Tablet, which has extensible memory. Like most of the models support in an external SD card, where you can have store more of your file, and in this case, you can store more applications. So as a best practices, most applications should specify prefer external for installed location in the Android manifest file. If left unspecified, keep in mind that your application will be installed by default on the internal storage. So good practice to specify prefer external. What are the challenges if a customer fills up their internal storage? Filling up internal storage can lead to fewer app installs, poor app ratings, negative customer experiences. So keep in mind that is important. Some users might have abundant space available in external storage, but if an app manifest does not specify prefer external, the app will always go first to internal storage. So prefer external is the way to go. And I will bounce back to you, Anisha, to talk about the security profile.
Awesome. And this is our penultimate pre-submission checklist tip. So this is mainly for if you're using Amazon device messaging. So if you are using ADM APIs, be prepared to associate your app with the security profile as part of that submission process. So before you can use the login with Amazon on a website or mobile app, you have to have a security profile assigned to that website or app. And that security profile must be enabled with login with Amazon. So when you associate the security profile with login with Amazon, you have to add information that is displayed to users when they first log in to one of the apps associated with that profile. And then the users will see your application, your logo, and a link to your privacy policy. And to use this, you'll have to supply a privacy notice URL and a logo image file, which will be displayed on the sign-in and consent screen to represent your business or website. So we do, again, have a lot of content on login with Amazon and ADM on the developer portal. But if this is something that you want to hear more about, drop us a message in the chat and, we can think about creating more videos around things you want to hear about. Because I know we don't have anything on ADM right now, but if it's something you want to hear about, please do tell us and we can do that. And I think that brings us on to our last point, which is compile errors. So I will let Mario finish on this one.
Yes, there are actually quite a lot quite a few to take in account in terms of potential compile errors. But these are things that would, be a no-go from an application, from a submission perspective. So you need to make sure that your application doesn't generate any of these errors. I will talk about maybe what is the most common one, even though there is an easy fix, which is the so-called 65,000 method build error. So the problem with that is that the Dalvik virtual machine on top of which the Android is based on has a limit of when you are getting close to 65,000 methods, it might generate a build error because that's a maximum amount of that by default Dalvik can support. There is an easy solution to this, which is to use multi-decks. There is, we will share the link. There is, if you follow, this is not just for Amazon, but for Android in general. You can add support for multi-decks, which is what I referenced as well before, and that will allow you to overcome the 65,000 methods issue. However, another way to do this, there are some best practices that you can follow. For example, is to avoid using very big libraries just for a few utility methods, because every library that you're adding to your application has the potential to increase the number of methods up to 65,000, and then break the limit, and then you have to use multi-decks. So a good best practices is make sure that, for example, if there are sub libraries that you can use that reduce the number of methods. AWS, for example, is a good example of that. Is used to have a few years ago a very big SDK that you had to add, but now instead have separate SDKs that you can add for specific supporting specific products or functions. So it's a good approach as a developer. Like check what type of libraries are available to use and how big are those. So we will share more of those. So make sure that as you're building your application, you're not getting any of those kind of fatal compile errors for your application. And I think we are now moving back to talk about DRM, right, Anisha?
Yeah, so I just wanted to quickly touch on it because we mentioned it. But the thing is, before, so if you've seen our videos on DRM, you'll know that we now have a new updated way to use DRM. So you can now use the Appstore API to enforce DRM within your app. So previously, Amazon used to add that wrapper to your APK when you submitted your app, and you could pick whether or not you wanted Amazon enforced DRM on the APK Files tab. However, now, and this will be sunsetted in the future, and we really do recommend that you migrate to the new Amazon DRM API. And if you want to learn how to do that, definitely got lots of videos on YouTube, and we had a dedicated session to that. So something to keep in mind as well, like if you see that pop up on your submission, just keep in mind that if you're enforcing DRM, which you should, definitely make sure that you do that. Awesome. So I think that's it for us from today. So pre-submission checklist. Make sure you keep that, save it, screenshot it when you're submitting your app, and don't worry about, we haven't spoken about what happens after you submit your app, because that is what we've got for a week from now. But that brings me on to next week. So did you want to introduce what we're going to do next week, Mario?
Absolutely. So next week is going to be actually a very, it should be a very fun session, because we do a AMA session, Ask Me Anything session, about Appstore and devices. So it's going to be interesting because Anisha will be, for once, will not be in London, but will be connecting from Seattle, which is very exciting, from the Amazon headquarters. I will still be here in London. So we will have, hopefully 2022 technology will allow us to all be connected at the same time and do this like we do every week. But it should be good fun. And also it's a great occasion because, throw us our questions. Please, questions about Appstore and devices. If you ask me or Anisha about like Amazon Fresh or Amazon Prime, we don't really know more than you do, but we know a couple things about the Amazon App Store and about our devices. So it should be a good session. Please prepare your questions. Shoot us your questions over Twitter as well, over LinkedIn, over YouTube. We want to hear more. And again, we will be live next time. We won't have slides. We won't have a presentation. It will just be kind of a free for all, ask questions, and, we'll do our best to answer them, of course. So please connect. Next week is going to be again 6 p.m. UK time and 10 a.m. for you, Anisha, on Pacific time. That's very cool.
Definitely. Very excited for that one. And after that, we will be doing the part 2 of submitting your app. So we thought we would utilize me being in Seattle to showcase the really cool Amazon headquarters to you guys live. And then we'll come back to submitting apps. So join in for both sessions. But, I'm sure you're all excited about Ask Me Anything next week. And if you want to use our hashtag Amazon FireSide Chat to ask questions, we'll be monitoring that throughout the stream, pre-stream as well. We'll make sure that anything you ask that is related to Appstore and devices will get answered. Maybe I'll come up with a few questions for Mario, and maybe you can do the same for me. Maybe my favorite, I can't really talk about my favorite tablet, but we can come up with some better ones.
We can talk about apps, like our favorite apps, and like why. What features do we like of those? And I think that would be cool. No, like you might get also to know us a little bit more. But it should be good fun. So please make sure to join us next week for this AMA session.
And if you have any questions about today's topic, you can post them in the chat. You can bring them next week even, or you can just ask them in the next session. So as usual, drop your questions in the chat. If we can't get to them today, we will get to them in our Ask Me Anything.
One thing that I noticed is that a lot of the links that we shared were shared on Twitch and on YouTube, but not on LinkedIn. That's a good learning for us. We can see questions from LinkedIn, but apparently our links are not available on LinkedIn. So if you want to, go back, these sessions have been recorded also on YouTube and Twitch, and you'll be able to see everything that has been posted in the chat as well. So you can go back and check. We will make sure that in the recording description as well, we add these links as well for you. But again, the most important is you can always go on developer.amazon.com if you search submission, there is a dedicated page up there in the top level search, and you can just click there, and you will see all the information that we shared today, and actually way more. So that's an easy solve. Anisha, again, I want to thank you as
Thank
usual
you.
for being a great host.
Thanks. It's good to have you back. I think by myself, I was very much. It's nice to have someone to bounce off of. So glad you're
Yes,
back.
and hopefully next week, and then no spoilers, we will have someone else joining as well.
Ooh, exciting.
Good
Thanks again,
stuff.
Mario. See you guys next week. Make sure you
Thank
enjoy
you, guys. See
the
you next
anything.
week for the AMA.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Cheers, guys. Bye bye.